Hollywood was stunned when Clint Eastwood, a living legend of American cinema, was forcibly escorted out of the Jimmy Kimmel live studio. What was meant to be a quiet evening of reminiscing and promoting a new film turned into an explosive confrontation, one that exposed the dark seams of an industry long swept under the rug. It all started routinely. The audience clapped as Eastwood appeared under the spotlights, a classic gray suit, a slow but steady gait, eyes sharp with an ironic glint. Sitting across from Kimmel, he was calm, as if he'd just shot the final scene of Unforgiven. But tension was already simmering backstage. "Tell us something we don't know about Clint Eastwood," Jimmy Kimmel said with a sly smile, leaning back in his chair under the glow of the lights. The cameras were rolling. The audience clapped automatically, unaware that the moment everything was building toward had already begun. Clint Eastwood sat opposite, in a dark gray jacket over a faded khaki shirt. No tie. His gaze was straight, like a horizon. His face weathered like an old desert map. He didn't smile. "When I was 11, he began slowly, as if weighing each word, "I pulled an injured dog out of a swamp. It bit me, and I had a fever for 2 weeks. My mom said, 'Now you'll either go wild or learn not to fear pain.' I think both turned out to be true." The audience chuckled tepidly. Kimmel nodded, as if mentally noting something. But in his eyes, there was a faint, restrained unease. Clint wasn't acting like a typical guest. He wasn't trying to please. Tension hung in the air. "Now," Kimmel's voice grew a bit sharper, "I have to ask you about something else. Clint, you've always been a symbol of strength, masculinity, even a heroic archetype. But times have changed. You've been criticized for, well, your views. Last week, you made a comment about fascism. Yesterday, there was your statement on racism. Many say your words are a voice from the past that doesn't hear the present." Eastwood didn't move. His eyes didn't flash. They were silent. "Do you really believe what you said?" Kimmel added, leaning forward. "Or is it just a way to grab attention?" The studio fell silent. You couldn't hear the room, only the faint hum of cameras, the barely audible buzz of monitors. Backstage, producers exchanged glances. This was supposed to be an easy show, a nostalgic appearance by an old legend. Now, something was cracking. Clint Eastwood leaned on his knee. He looked past Kimmel, straight into the camera. "I grew up in a time when fascism wasn't a political meme but a real horror. We saw it killed in Italy, in Normandy, in the hell of Stalingrad. And when I said some things today have the smell of fascism, I meant intolerance, from any side. When people are canceled for mistakes made 20 years ago, when they're judged by age, race, or gender, that's not progress. That's control. That's fear. And fear, Mr. Kimmel, always leads to repression." A pause. No one clapped. The audience wasn't sure. Was this a performance or an accusation? "And on racism," Eastwood continued, quieter now, "I don't need to read tweets to know what it's like to face prejudice. My grandfather worked on the railroad with an Irish accent and hands stained with grease. He wasn't allowed in cafes with signs that read, 'No dogs, no Irish.' My partner in my first film, a black guy from Georgia, couldn't sit at the front of the bus. And now someone's trying to teach me about justice?" Kimmel gave a crooked smile, attempting to regain control. "But isn't it about new rules? That old models are outdated." Eastwood glanced sideways. Slowly. "When society screams that old voices are no longer needed, that's not progress. It's fear of losing power in a new form. And you know what else? I'm not afraid of being old. I'm afraid of being silent when a new kind of hunt begins." Someone in the audience gasped. Another clapped, hesitantly at first, then a second, a third. The applause wasn't loud, but it didn't stop. Kimmel swallowed. He sensed the moment slipping out of his control. And Clint sat like a statue, still and calm. His face didn't beg for agreement. It spoke. "Now, over to you. Leave a comment. Do you think the voices of the older generation no longer matter today? Should we listen or let them go?" "You're asking if I really believe what I said?" Eastwood leaned forward, hands on his knees. His voice grew firmer. The room fell silent again, more expectant than awkward. Let me ask you, how can we say fascism is over when it's right here, even in our power? Kimmel flinched. The cameras zoomed in slowly. At that moment, Clint was no longer a guest. He had fully taken the stage. You think I'm exaggerating? Walk into any federal office. Look at the armed guards, scanners, biometrics. Try asking about accountability. You'll either be ignored or added to a list. In my town, a journalist filed a public records request. Her house was searched the next week. Officially, a technical error. Unofficially, it was a lesson. Kimmel tried to steer the conversation back to safer ground. But those are isolated cases. We're talking about the system as a whole, not— No, Eastwood interrupted. That is the system. When power fears people, we have democracy. But when people fear power, that's something else. I've made movies about it. Now I see it in real life. And who's going to say it out loud if not me? You? Clint's gaze shifted to Kimmel. The audience didn't clap. They hung on every word. For the first time that evening, even the youngest in the studio looked tense, not relaxed. Because this didn't sound like politics. It sounded like a reality everyone felt but couldn't name. I'm not trying to offend anyone, Eastwood continued. I'm saying we've learned to be afraid again. We're afraid of saying the wrong word, of being canceled, fired, having our accounts frozen, our taxes audited. That's not freedom. That's control. And I don't care if it's from the left or the right. Because fascism isn't just a swastika. It's also the smiling face of a bureaucrat saying, "We're doing this for your safety." Kimmel sat upright. He wasn't joking anymore. His director signaled to cut to commercial, but Eastwood kept going. And one more thing. You know why I came here? Not to promote a new film. Because I know my generation is quietly dying out. And when we're gone, so is everything we knew. Fear of dictatorship, respect for privacy, honor. Then all that's left are screens, ratings, and polished truth. Those last words hit harder than anything before. You could hear a camera operator swallow hard. The producers finally acted. They cut the broadcast and the screen flashed to, "We'll be right back." Music played, but it no longer mattered. When the cameras shut off, Kimmel turned to Eastwood and said sharply, "You just ruined my week. This was supposed to be nostalgia, and you brought fear into the studio." Eastwood stood. Slowly. His voice was calm. If you're afraid of fear, don't sit across from someone who's lived with it their whole life. He took his jacket, slung it over his shoulder, and walked out. Slowly, like in a frame. No one clapped. Even Kimmel's team was silent. That evening, clips of the interview spread like wildfire online. But most networks avoided the full version. Too uncomfortable. Too real. On Twitter, the hashtag number Eastwood was right took off. Clint Eastwood stepped out of a black Lincoln without a smile, in a dark coat, old boots, and no security. He was 84, but in that moment, he looked younger than everyone around him, because he was composed. Ready. Accompanied only by one man. Not a lawyer, but a former soldier. His friend from the days of shooting American Sniper. No name tags on their lapels. Clint was formally charged with spreading disinformation that could cause public panic and distrust in government institutions. In truth, it was for saying what everyone else was silent about. "Mr. Eastwood," the prosecutor began with a slightly smug smile, "you're an iconic figure, an influential voice, and that's why we're here. Because your voice was used not to unite, but to undermine trust. Do you call that free speech?" "I call it freedom of thought," Clint replied. "And mine hasn't been locked up yet." The courtroom was packed. Among those present were veterans, directors, even a few senators in disguise. But in the back rows sat others, security analysts, agents, silent observers. The prosecutor leaned over the podium. "You accuse the U.S. government of fascism. Do you realize the impact that has? You've sown fear in the hearts of millions." Eastwood stood slowly. His back was straight. "I didn't sow fear. I named it. And if millions recognize their truth in my words, then I'm not the one who created the problem. You ignored it." A chill ran through the room. The judge tried to remain neutral, but her pencil trembled in her fingers. This was no longer a celebrity trial. It was becoming a symbol. Free speech isn't a license, the prosecutor said. It has limits. You crossed a line when you called the state fascist. And if it's true, Clint replied, if a system that rates journalists for asking inconvenient questions no longer serves the people but controls them, you want to judge me for that? Go ahead. But first, look around. A recess. The courthouse halls buzzed with tension, like a game with no script. Some prosecutors whispered with national security reps. One agent pulled out a phone, recorded a brief clip of Clint, then deleted it. Cameras didn't catch it, but the observers were everywhere. In the courtroom, journalists were already writing articles without waiting for the verdict. The old cowboy versus the new America. Eastwood fires again, this time with words. Fascism, just a word or a reality? We're afraid to admit. At the end of the day, the defense spoke. Eastwood refused a lawyer. He stepped to the podium himself, holding something like a script folder. I'm not here to win or to convince anyone. I'm here because if we stay silent, that's when fascism comes. Quietly, gently. It doesn't arrive with a swastika. It comes with promises of order, safety, silence. But silence isn't freedom. It's just an imitation. He raised the script. This is a film I'll never make. It's called The Last Shot. In it, an old man stands on a bridge and speaks the truth. And he's heard. Not by everyone, but by enough. And then, it doesn't matter. Because he did his part. I've done mine. Now it's your turn. The judge postponed the verdict for a week. But Eastwood left the courtroom not as a defendant, as a voice. Outside, thousands stood silently. No signs, no slogans, just silence. Because sometimes silence speaks louder than words. Washington, a week after the hearings. Heavy clouds crawled over the Capitol. The city was quiet. Morning news didn't open with politics or war. Just one name dominated the headlines: Clint Eastwood. At 9 a.m., the courtroom was packed again. Broadcasters were silent. Politicians sipped coffee intently, and the public awaited a sentence. Cameras focused on the judge. She appeared quietly. Her gaze was direct, tired, but clear. Mr. Eastwood, she began, you said words many found dangerous, but we don't judge people for thoughts. The truth of your words is a matter for civic dialogue, not criminal prosecution. A pause. The court finds no grounds to convict you. You are free. The room erupted in applause. Someone shed a tear. Clint only nodded slightly, as if he'd expected exactly this. Like a good actor who knows where the climax lies but never plays it too loudly. He stepped out onto the courthouse steps. Press, microphones, eyes, all on him. I'm grateful, he said. This story is fiction. Clint Eastwood wasn't tried. He didn't give those speeches, and the courtroom events never happened in real life. But if for a moment you thought this could be true, maybe you should ask yourself, why?